Hey, this is Todd. Happy New Year. I'm recording this, I guess the 9th or 10th of January. I'm kind of getting over the doldrums from the holidays, the hangover, so I apologize for not putting out more content, but hopefully this is the first of some rapid-fire catch-up on my part. The subject of this is something that's been on my mind a long time, but I've always struggled to figure out how to communicate it. I don't really know that I figured that out, but I'm just going to try it anyway, so we'll just see how it goes. And that is using elements from board games, which I'm also very much a fan of and love to play, and using different things from board games in role-playing games. And I'm going to use D&D as an example, though you can probably find uses for it in many other games. But when I talk about D&D in this case, I just mean a stand-in for any RPG. This is probably would relate to any particular genre. Again, I'm going to be looking at it in sort of a fantasy sense. That's going to be the genre I'm in, but I think it will be applicable in sci-fi, horror. I think anything for this particular one that has a sandbox campaign kind of map overview segment. If you're playing something very narrative, very story-driven, you might not find as much application with this, but maybe you will. Anyhow, the board game that I'm talking about with this is Pandemic. It's a game I really like, cooperative game. This is not a review of Pandemic. I am not going to particularly go over how to play Pandemic outside of how the particular mechanic that I'm going to talk about relates to use in D&D or your RPG of choice. So don't come in here, if you're coming in here looking at, I'm going to teach you or I'm going to kind of review Pandemic, that's not what you're going to get. There's no real spoilers for Pandemic. It's a great game. It's really classic at this point. I've played a few different versions of Pandemic. I've played I forget what it's called now, the campaign style Pandemic, the seasons that they have released. Most of the first season or half of the first season. Great stuff, but that's not what this is about in particular. This is about using how Pandemic handles its main focus, which is the spread and the curing of disease, using that to simulate the growth and expansion of factions in your D&D game. So I'm going to switch the camera angles so you can see the board, which is sitting on my table right here. There's the board. I think I might have been a little too fast. There's the board. So give me a sec. I'm going to switch camera angles so we can look at the board, and I will take it from there. And give me a moment to switch camera angles so you can look at the board better, and then we'll dig into exactly what I'm talking about in terms of what you can take from Pandemic and potentially use in your campaign. So hold on one sec, and we'll be right back. like a sci-fi game or any other game where your players have a lot of information at their fingertips, maybe they would have some idea of which factions are where. Maybe this could be, if they were working for an intelligence service, say in Star Trek somewhere, and if they were in Starfleet, Section 33 or 66 or whatever they call it, the intelligence services, they might very well have a map like this. And this is the Romulans, this is the Dominion, this is, the Borg, and that is something else. The Cardassians. And they might see that, we're getting an uptick in Cardassian activity in New Baghdad, in the Baghdad system. And we've got a little bit of Borg activity in the Khartoum Nebula, right? Same things apply. So there are a couple things, if you look at this, you go, wow, this is a great idea. How could I actually actualize this for my game? One, you have to have some kind of map somewhere that has these systems, has the either star systems or cities, these places where we're tracking, these centers that we're tracking. Got to have that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a map. You could have it could be a digit. It doesn't have to be a board, I guess I should say. It could be a map. You could have something in Photoshop or GIMP. Anything else that you can put things on. You could use Excel or anything to track. It's nice to see it, right? It makes a nice visual. And obviously, if in Pandemic's place, you're playing it as a board game, so you need the visual. But if you are just going to have it behind the screen, so to speak, you really just need some way of tracking it. Now, you could ask, well, I could roll dice, or I could do something else. I could use some other method other than cards. Cards are nice because of this epidemic mechanic that they have. Like I mentioned earlier, when you're hitting cities, these go into a discard pile. So, okay, we've hit Taipei, we've hit Baghdad, we've hit Johannesburg. Those are going to go into a discard pile. I believe every city only comes up once, I think. Maybe twice. Maybe there's two in here. I think maybe it's only once. So you have all these cards represent all the cities. So you think if these are in the discard pile, you cannot activate them again. But as I mentioned, there's these epidemics, which are special cases that are actually drawn as part of the player's turn when they're drawing cards for their hand to help cure stuff and get special little abilities. They draw these epidemics. The epidemics cause you to then take these cards back, put them on top of your draw pile, pull a new city that becomes hyper-infected, and then you have to draw through the cities you've already been to. And that means that unlike dice, you end up with this distribution, whereas, yes, it's a one-time only thing until you get an epidemic, in which case you're going back through the ones you've already done, and you have to go cycle through all the ones you've already hit before you can hit new ones. There's probably a way to do that with dice. Certainly there would be a way to program it in. If you were writing a little program, maybe I will write a little web app to do that. That'll be a fun little exercise. But cards work for that kind of thing, where you have a discard pile, you have a draw pile, and then it lets you manipulate. So once something's in the discard, you know that it's not going to get hit again unless there's that epidemic. So how do you, if we're not having player turns in this case, what would an epidemic card look like? Or how would you trigger an epidemic? Which is fairly important, because if there are no epidemics, then there's no way to get more than one cube. There's no way to escalate the situation. How would you do that? Well, that, I think, in terms of a role-playing game is, you could roll a die. I don't know what the odds are. I could probably figure it out in the base game, depending on how difficult you're making it. There are 5 or 6 or 4 to 6 epidemic cards throughout the player's deck that they're drawing. I don't know what the odds are, but you could easily say, maybe you want to go with roll a 1 on a d6. Roll a 1 on a d20 if you want to make it a 5% chance. Roll 1 on a d100 if you want to make it a very small chance. I think it's, obviously the smaller chances you make it mean the more stable the situation is, and that's something you could use in your favor. You could use the stability versus chaos. The more crazy things are going, the higher the chances are. So maybe at the beginning of the game, beginning of the campaign, when nothing crazy is really happening, it is just a 1 in 100 chance, or a 1 in 20 chance, 5%. As events unfolding and everything's gearing up and more crazy things happening, you're raising the stakes and the tensions are going up, then suddenly it becomes a 1 or 2 in 20 chance, or maybe a 1 in 5 in 20 chances. So you can use that as a way of escalating what's happening. If you want to show that here this society or the world is really under pressures that are mounting and growing, you can, model that through increasing the odds of these explosions and everything happening. Now, this is still mechanical. As the GM, you will still have to go in there and figure out what it means when you have, the Zentarum have had an outbreak, had some kind of explosion of influence in Baghdad or in, Waterdeep. What does that mean? Waterdeep. And how does that information disseminate? In a sci-fi type world or a modern world where you have modern communications, you think about, well, what did the Zentarum do if they had this explosion in town? Do they have a coup? Did something really... I think an explosion warrants something really, really visible. A lot of factions, they're operating behind the scenes, they're this, that, and the other, sneaky. I think when you get that explosion, it should be something where they've reached this boiling point of influence where they feel like they can raise that flag. We've gotten to the point where we don't need to be in the shadows anymore. It's that really big coming out party. So what does that mean? Obviously, in terms of mechanically, it means that they're spreading out to other towns. They've mastered or they've dominated that town to the degree, and it's caused their influence to spread. Actually, that wouldn't go there. Yeah, just ideally you're supposed to follow the roads. Before I didn't, so yes, I was wrong. If you exploded Baghdad, Moscow would not get infected. So please don't come at me, pandemic players, to point out my fault. I'm sure I'm making other mistakes along the way, but anyhow, you have to figure out what that means. If it's something big like that, I think that word would spread, right? If Waterdeep fell to the Zentarum, or someone from one of the council of whatever, the 12, or if I forget the ruling body came out was Zentarum, or some other big thing happened in Waterdeep, that's big news. It could spread. And then you could think about, well, what do the players do? What do these other factions do? How do all these people respond to it? And that's really the ultimate goal of this tool, is you're looking at it and you're saying, you may have pandemic cards, you may have a board, you may have the instructions, you can look through it. And, I just thought I had this stuff. Hey, how can this be leveraged for something else, right? How can I throw this in my toolbox? And this is what I came up with just off the top of my head. And I think it's a good way of showing how factions are going. It's a very easy way. Once you get your system up and going, once you've color coded your map, you've figured out which factions are where. If you have 4 factions, let's say, you could use a regular set of playing cards to pretty much determine which factions activate. You'd still need to, if you had, let's say, well, let me see, hold on. Alright, we got a set of playing cards here. Let's just hash this out right here. Right here, right now. We'll get rid of the face cards. Alright, so we just want, so we know that we have, I don't know. Alright, so we're going to deal with just the number cards. So we'll say that, we could say red is diamonds, or, whatever, we could say hearts. So we got these playing cards. So we know for this to work, you need to have 10 cities, 10 locations. Maybe there are more locations on there, maybe figure out, you might have to make it work, but let's say we can just say we got 10. Well, that's what we'll say is, you have to have 10 settlements of a certain size. And if we're using hex maps, and I love hex maps, and if you don't know, check out some of my other videos, you will learn I love hex maps. Instead of this could be a region, right? Instead of thinking of Baghdad as just a city, we can think of Baghdad as a hex region around that, which would help if we need to spread. If we think, wow, 10 sites, it's not a lot, well, we could use these to represent larger geographical areas, or if you wanted to shrink it down and use it in a microcosm situation, and you can use this if you want to do this in a city. If you wanted these to be neighborhoods instead of regions on a global scale, and you wanted to have turf wars, and that's how you needed some way to figure out where these different gangs were going and how they were interacting. This same type of system works. You're just shrinking the scale. You can blow up the scale to star systems, shrink it down to square blocks if you want, buildings, apartments, however it works. But we say whatever we're going to do, we're going to stick with 10. And unfortunately, with regular playing cards, we only have 4 suits. So we'll pick the 4 biggest factions, and we could have sub-factions. However, if you really want to get in the weeds on it, you can. But I think 4 factions is a good number. And again, if you have less than 4, that's fine, because you can just take those cards out of the deck. Just take spades or clubs or whichever one you don't want to use out of the deck. Leaves you with 10 locations, each one belonging to each faction. Every time you're on a faction turn, and you can define a faction turn however you'd like, you're going to pick a card, and you will then code which city matches ace, which one matches 2, which one matches 3 down the line. So each one of these will have a code, will correspond to that place. You pull it out, you can roll a die. Oh, this is a 1, so this explodes, so I will put this back on the deck, do whatever, and then this is going to kind of get a double pop. Keep going. So you don't even really need to make a custom set of cards per se to use cards to do it. You really just need to have a cipher, just a code to then translate that to regular old playing cards if you have those. You could probably use I know that there are other types of decks of cards. You could probably figure out how to make it with tarot cards if you wanted to. You could probably, anything that's got basically different suits and different, it basically has 2 things, right? Some kind of number or letter or symbol, and then some other kind of identifier that gives you groups, because we need the groups for the faction and we need the symbols for the places. As long as your deck of cards or whatever you have has something like that, and some way of discarding them and then bringing them back, which again dice don't have to my knowledge, but maybe there's a way to make that work. You can do that, and there you have a way to dynamically generate movement and operations of factions. Again, it's really high level. It's not telling you what the factions are doing. It's not telling you at whose expense they're doing it. That's all going to have to come from your imagination. You could probably generate some random tables to help if you want to figure out if things were they take over a government, they obtain some obscene amount of wealth, they infiltrate a church there to the highest levels, whatever it means, and you might need to adjust those particular factions given their interests. If it's a mob, maybe it's all about money centers and how they're dominating trade, things like that. If it's thieves guilds, that might be, again, it would be more thievery based. If it's a church organization as a faction, that might be how much they've gotten the ruling families, whoever runs the earthly management. Maybe they've been able to get them all over and indoctrinated in the church. Whatever that means, you have to figure all that out. But when you're looking for ways to add dynamism to your world, once you got set up, a very easy way to do that. I think it gives you a lot of bang for your buck. You don't need to own Pandemic. All you need is some way to track your factions, some way to track where they are, right? A simple map or even just a list of cities and how they connect to each other. And you can even ditch that if you wanted to. If you really just wanted to have it all be, hey, whatever's nearby, you just look on your map and go. You can. You don't have to use these kind of maps. These kind of lines of travel if you don't want to. It adds a little wrinkle. In the game, this is also for movement, so it does add something to it. If as a player I'm in Baghdad, I can't just go to Moscow in one jump. I got to go 2, and that's meaningful in terms of the game Pandemic. But if it's not meaningful to you and you just want to use the overland travel and hex rules that you have, or some other method, and if everybody's sci-fi and they've got dropships and warp drive and hyperdrive, then it may not be meaningful. So just make those tweaks wherever you want. But there's the system, Pandemic. Great game. I think it's got something to offer for your RPG. If you've got Pandemic in your closet and you haven't played in a while, brush it off. Take a look at it, see how it can work for your game. If you do use it some way, I'd love to hear how you've used it. I have not tested this myself. This is purely at this point, a mental exercise, but I might put together a web app if I have the time to kind of set that up, at least give it a test run that way. If I do that, I will maybe post another video about it. I will certainly link to this video if I do something like that, but I think there's something here. If you've been wondering how to get factions in your game and how to manage it and how to figure out how they move around and what they do, and you don't have inspiration, or you find you struggle with that inspirational part and they end up just being statically in different places, here's a great option to get them moving around the map and causing mischief and aiming for world dominance, as any good faction should. I will switch back for some final thoughts from the map, so just give me a sec. Alright, so I hope that was useful to you. I really like Pandemic. I really like that mechanic. It's very simple. It will take some work if you're going to adapt this kind of card playing mechanic. You could probably use dice, some other methodology. If you are programming minded, it'll be very easy to create some JavaScript or Python or whatever scripts of your choice, language that you like, to create a little app or web app to go through and cycle through some randomness and pull out different factions. It's one of those things that like encounter systems, like a lot of stuff I talked to on my hex crawl videos, it's something that you're going to put a lot of work into it at the beginning to set it up if it's something you choose to use. But once you have it, it's going to be really dead easy to utilize for your game. You know, every time you're running, say, a faction round or a campaign round or a world round where world events and things are happening, once you have that system set up, flip a coin, roll a die, press a button on a website or on your phone or wherever, bang, you suddenly have some dynamic events that you can play with. And it's great to see, you know, in my mind, the thing with the pandemic that's so great is the unexpected stuff where you kind of know what's going to happen, but you don't know. You have this idea, and the way things just kind of can spiral out of control in a very fun way, how things can suddenly go from very much contained to exploding, and how do you do that? And I think that applies really well to a sandbox kind of system in which you have different cities with different factions, and maybe those factions overlap, maybe they don't. What happens when a faction gets enough influence in a particular city? You can look at that same thing, I'm sure, to many leaders of the world, particular organizations, they would see it as some kind of parasite or some kind of disease that both they want to eradicate and that both has the potential to explode and create an epidemic in their kingdom. So in many ways, and if you want to take sort of a cynical political view, it can be it is an apt, I think, comparison, and you can model it, right? You just have your map written out. You can have areas that are the main the fields of operation for these different factions. But of course, what we've seen with epidemics, when they explode, factions can move into places that they would not normally have gone. They can push through those boundaries, and then those explosions can keep cascading and see where it takes you. And it's something that you can surface to the players in different ways. You don't have to show them a board with cubes and make it very board gamey like that. It can be something where they're getting news reports. They're seeing stuff come in on ravens or however information is transmitted. Maybe they have patrons who are telling them. Maybe they're part of a faction that's either exploding and gaining all this influence, and that creates new opportunities for them, or they're in a faction that is being adversely affected by these explosions. Maybe they're in the faction that they're in one faction and another faction has exploded into that region, and now there's conflict there. And of course, all we're talking about is really mechanical stuff here. You're going to, as the DM, as using the system, you're going to have to think about, and imagine what the fictional consequences of all these epidemics and explosions are. But what I love is just food for your imagination, food for thought that you can throw at your players. So if you try this out, if you make a version of this, let me know how it goes. Hopefully it just jogs. If anything, it just jogs your imagination of different systems you can pull in from different places. But hopefully this will be the first of many videos that I will throw together this month and beyond. So stay tuned as my iPad falls over. Stay tuned. Hey, look, I'm on Patreon. I'm on Ko-Fi. If you like this stuff and you want to encourage me to keep doing it and help me, fund my adventures and misadventures in the worlds of creating D&D and RPG content, the links are in the descriptions. Please click on them. Just subscribe if you just want to follow what I'm doing. If you feel like donating or becoming a patron, that's great. I really appreciate it. But please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I don't know, there's a little bell that will let you know when I do something. That's also great. But if you can spare a thumb up or something like that, it really does help. It really makes a difference for me. But really, have a great weekend. Have a great, whenever you're watching this, great rest of your day, evening, morning, noon, night. I will talk to you later.